October 10th version of the Iamblichus reading group. Tonight we continue talking about Iamblichus's concept of cosmic sympathy, and we get personal. And right before we started recording, Farjana and I were discussing, how to make this personal, because, Iamblichus is writing, about 1700, 1800 years ago. And, 2000 years ago, right? No, 1800 years ago. And he's writing, a lot of this stuff comes across as very old, and, it's something that we could really relate to. Maybe not necessarily even as far as the old stuff which he's talking about in terms of his metaphysics and his ontology, but also just anything relatable in our own experiences that we can somehow latch onto with what he's discussing. And for me, I think he's talking about real things. I think he's talking about entities and other things which he has actually had personal experience with. But because he's a philosopher and because he's a theurgist, he's trying to fit those personal experiences into this, like I was saying, this metaphysics, this cosmology, this ontology that he's grown up with and that he's devoted his life to. But it's really hard for, I think, at least for me, to really hang my hat on anything that he's talking about, except having these experiences, which are, at least for me, often, non-communicable. It's very difficult to discuss them in a really meaningful way. What brought this on was I was reading something about, I was looking through this encyclopedia of philosophy, and I just happened to come across something about ESP, which is weird in and of itself because it's so-called really serious book about all the subjects related to philosophy, and then they have a pretty extensive encyclopedic entry about ESP. And I found that, that's really interesting. And it ended up, most of it was basically saying, we don't know how to explain this. We have these things which can be statistically proven. We can show that, something like communication across distances without speaking is possible. We have the tests which can prove that. But how do we then explain it? What is there that we can use? What types of concepts can we use to explain it, either from physics or metaphysics or whatever? And there was a great quote in there from William James about consciousness, which I didn't write down. But I'm just wondering, can we begin to explain or describe how it fits into our own experiences? And I think once we say, okay, we've had these experiences, they're real to us, then can we begin to see whether Iamblichus's description of them makes sense to us, either in a personal sense or otherwise. And I was hoping that, just one more thing. I was hoping that we could, if people aren't too uncomfortable with this, maybe describing some things that happened to you, which I'm quite willing to do as well. I'm willing to share. Sorry,
Sure.
go ahead. I cut you off.
I think that's kind of one of the reasons that I enjoy Iamblichus so much, is because you can tell, even though he's like trying to use all of this philosophical language and put it into a respectable philosophical framework, he's just kind of talking about it like magical practice, pretty much point blank, and like openly, explicitly, and but not in a way that's saying you need to stop philosophizing about it, or it's not a serious subject or something. He's actually trying very hard to make it a serious subject by taking this practical thing that he does and trying to put it into language that philosophers will accept, which I think is a pretty bold project of his.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the discussion prompt, I was thinking along the lines of when you were saying, come with an example of cosmic sympathy, and then your different phrasing of it now, just come with an example of a weird experience that is amenable to philosophizing about, or that is hard to explain and that makes you want to explain it.
And use the concept of see what I'm thinking. I mean, with cosmic sympathy, I get it conceptually. Like, I mean, we can read maybe a little bit later. We can read his further description, if you will, of cosmic sympathy. And you know, I went through and went back to Plotinus and looked at his description of cosmic sympathy. But it's still, like I said, I can understand it conceptually, but when I try to relate and say, okay, well, have I had experiences similar to this? That's where I get the disconnect. I mean, I have had strange experiences, but are they the same as cosmic sympathy? I'm sorry. That's why I was rephrasing it. I'm just trying to clarify why I rephrased it.
So heard. Yeah. I guess I could get the ball rolling. I have an example. I have a couple examples I could pick from, I guess, but I think I'll start with the probably more mystical of the two. So one example of, to me, the philosophical idea of cosmic sympathy plugs straight into the magical idea of correspondences. So there are a lot of things that are described as sympathetic or corresponding in magic, and you use those things to you know, if you want the virtue of the harder to get thing, you use the virtue of the easier to get thing as a way to smuggle that into your into your experience. And one of the most direct ways of doing this, or one of the most available ways of doing this, is looking at the correspondences in the human body. And so one of the most classic and sort of cross-cultural, I think, one of the ones that seems to really persist is the idea of the sympathy between the human heart and the sun. So like both of them are at the center of their respective systems. Both of them bring sort of heat and life outwards to the other parts of that system. And both of them are the sun in an obvious way and the heart in a less obvious way, conceived of as radiant or shining, because your heart, subjectively, when you feel your heart, if you feel love or something, it can feel like it's sort of shining out. And also physically, it's pumping blood out of itself. So it's pushing things outwards, and connecting the core of your body with what's out from that, which could be the rest of your body, and sort of esoterically the rest of the universe. In an experiential way, I do a lot of meditation practices, Buddhist meditation practices, which involve visualizing Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, whatever, enlightened beings. And in the end, usually, they dissolve into light, and the light dissolves into your heart. And this correspondence between the heart and the sun becomes really important in practices like those, because if the heart were just a physical heart or a blood pump, then the light dissolves in your heart, so what? I mean, you know, so the Buddha's going to pump your blood for you. Like the real meaning is that when it dissolves into light and it dissolves into your heart, is that your heart is luminous. Like the reason why the light would merge with your heart is because your heart is already light. And so, because the heart plays the role of the sun, because the heart is this thing that shines out light and life, that when the spiritual being dissolves into your heart, merges with your heart, its virtues mingle with your core, the middle of your body, and shine out from you to the rest of the universe. And so, because the heart is like the sun, and the sun is something that shines light, right? This merging allows you to shine that light. This is maybe a kind of a mystical spiritual example that's a little bit obscure, but I think if you think of the experience of what it's like to feel sort of open-heartedness and feel love like that, that feeling as though that love is shining out from your chest, like the sensation of it, it can be a little bit more of an accessible way to get at what I'm talking about.
I find it really interesting that you brought up the example of the heart and the sun, because that's honestly exactly what I was going to say.
Nice.
Almost word for word, actually. I'm glad I'm like on the same wavelength. So I'll choose a slightly different example then. For me, I feel like this has been at least, tangentially clear in our conversations in the past. Though I am very interested in becoming better and kind of like putting a little bit more weight behind this side of my practice. I've always considered myself a little bit more of a magician than like a theurgist. I have done several workings that have produced like extremely real, tangible results in my life. And that, does embody things like people that have come into my life, even money that's come into my life. These are all things that, I've found great success with. In fact, more success with those sorts of things than direct experiential theurgy, I would say. I think I've told you guys a few times, like I've probably had 3 or 4 real experiences that I'm like, yeah, no, it worked. The ritual worked. I feel good about that. But bringing it back, because again, when you use correspondences, use the language of correspondences, like that is almost exactly how I perceive something like cosmic sympathy. And actually something that I've found has been very helpful in me, like initiating these experiences, actually is through gardening, oddly enough. Like I love to garden. I've got a little herb garden that I use for my practice as well as my kitchen. And when I have found myself caring for the plants themselves that carry that sympathy, a big one that I actually have used a lot is a lemon tree, in association with the sun. And this isn't necessarily something that I have read anywhere. It's intuitive, to me, the lemon tree is the sun. You know what I mean? And when I spend time sitting, focusing on the plant itself, trying to I'll sit by it, like trim its leaves, I'll water it, I'll try and like put genuine care and attention into it. That has always helped me the most in the experiential side of things. So I mean, like one fairly prominent example that I often think of actually came about just after one of these, like, I would call them like meditative care sessions almost. A little bit weird, I know, but I think you do got to create your own practice at the end of the day. And actually it was funny, you brought up the bodhisattvas. Mine was with the Agathodaimon, who again, I've not something that I'm trying to gain greater understanding of. So like by me caring for this plant and putting my heart into it, as you say, pretty much directly after that, I had a fairly intense visual, well, not fairly intense, extremely intense visual experience of this being. That, and when you said that when you used the word melted or dissolved into your heart, that really spoke to me. Because again, it's like almost describing the experience perfectly. Yeah, so for me, like being able to attune myself to the plant in this case, being able to like put myself into it and try to honestly like become one with it. I know it sounds a bit hokey, but really that's what I am doing when I do these things. It really helps me to reach above. And I think it's all through that idea of cosmic sympathy. And I'm like, it's like that the phrase that I used last week. It's not like the lemon tree reflects the sun, reflects the heart. It is the sun and it is the heart. And by breaking down those barriers, it allows for the ascension in my mind. Again, I know that was a little bit like weird and like not necessarily ritual as Iamblichus presents it or anything, but I do think that I've always been, and whenever people ask me, you know, how do you practice? How do I do magic, Ryan? You know, I always tell them, you need to create it. That's the only way. It needs to come from yourself. Again, I don't know what you guys have to say to that one. I know maybe a little bit out there, but it's an experience that I've got with this. But again, I think it's about understanding that these things are one and the same. That's the bottom line for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of relate to that, to what you're saying, because it's not similar, but it's like my experience of how I would explain it along those lines. But for me, the way that I'm understanding it is there seems to be like a hierarchy, the way that this sympathy is explained, like a hierarchy. So it's almost as if I have to get from my body to my soul to my spirit in order to get in touch with that. So my experiences came personally, but also when I've been working one-to-one with people, so like creation, because they have the same thing that I have, and as does everything else in creation. So the hierarchy seems to be, you know, from a more dense to a less dense, basically all the way to a light body. And the way that we work in craniosacral therapy is called the tides. So the body, the dense body, will have a shorter time, and it's called the tide. So it's called the short tide. And then you've got the mid tide as you go into the next layer, and then you're accessing the mid tide. And then when some people go into the long tide, you're accessing something extremely deep. And sometimes the experience goes on to such a deep level that it becomes like you're in bliss. You almost don't exist. So that's kind of how I've had these experiences. Because
yeah, it's like creating a oneness between yourself and the sympathetic focus, I think is a good way to describe it. Like breaking down that barrier.
And that's what does happen, you know, working one-to-one. It does, you end up in training, or the person ends up in training with you, and there doesn't seem to be a division as you go through the layers. And it comes to a point where I actually stop feeling the body, like I'm not feeling the density anymore, and it's feeling more fluid, and then it's feeling more like air, and then it's feeling more like nothingness. And it's extraordinarily strange because it's a touch therapy. So, you know, it really does demonstrate that, actually, the density may well be an illusion, but it's really, really strange how it just starts to change and then it starts to disappear. Very weird, very strange. But yeah, I can kind of relate to
And you
to
definitely
that.
have that like moment, where it's like,
Yeah. Hmm.
okay, now where it's like the ignition starts almost. There's that drive, that push that I think propels you. I mean, I always use the terminology of the above, propels you to the above,
Mm. And it's purely experiential. Like it's happening in my body. I'm feeling it. I'm experiencing it. It's happening to me. So it's a
Yeah.
very real thing. It's real. Like it's a very real experience.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to bring. I think this is a good time to bring this up. I read this quote. Right, I will admit it was a tweet, not from anything, not from any great work or anything like that, but it did speak to me. It's a Mitch Horowitz tweet. I don't know if you guys are aware of who that is. Kind of just like he's probably one of the more well-known, famous, like monetarily successful people writing on the occult right now, I would say. I'm just going to bring it up here so I can get it exact. Yeah, okay. So he says, to some extent, we all invent what we worship. The nature of perception alone suggests this, but accepting this premise doesn't mean that it alone defines the deific encounter. So this one really spoke to me, especially when we're talking about, the issue of cosmic sympathy specifically, because I think that it is so wrapped up, and a lot of this stuff is, for me, is wrapped up in perception, in your own ability to drive the car, so to speak. Whether we're talking about the Agatha Daimon or the Bodhisattvas, there is a strain that connects those two things, right? And that, I think, comes from our perception of the divine. Maybe different languages speaking the same truth, something like that. So I found that little tangent, little side note, but I wanted to bring it up in this week's session because it spoke to me quite deeply.
Interesting. It's interesting. Thank you, everyone. I don't know whether you noticed, but everyone spoke, when they explained their experience, they spoke from a methodology, so to speak. There was meditation, there was the methodology of magical herbology, I guess, and then the type that you're talking about, Farshana, which I don't know. Sounds more of a massage oriented, or
It's more an energetic thing where it goes into the different layers.
But it's from a it's from a method that you've learned.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I don't know that I have anything except anything recent that where I've experienced anything like what everyone has discussed right now, because it's all seems that it's very organized and very systematic in the way that you've approached it. You've adopted a practice, and you've gone ahead and in that practice you've experienced things. I do have had in the past, and maybe my practice is no practice. At least when I was experiencing these things, it was more of a chaotic mentality where I'm going to try to invoke whatever it is that might be out there by living a certain lifestyle. And the closest thing I can come to is and this was semi-conscious on my part, is Arthur Rimbaud's notion of disassembling or deconstructing one's sensations and one's emotions. And it was while I was going through that, it was more of a part of a self-destructive mode that I was living in, that I had some of the stranger experiences that I've had. one where I thought that I had actually contacted the literal abyss of Satan, which came after a period of dissolution of drug and alcohol dissolution. But I also had one where I was not really trying to do anything, and all I was doing was driving down the road. And it was after work. I've been working a long time during that day, and I was getting off. I was hoping to get home real quickly, of course. And as I was driving out of the parking lot and then driving towards the red light, I was waiting for the red light to change to red from green. And it was very strange because as I approached the red light, it stayed green. I was going like, well, this is really, really strange. This red light seems to be going, this green light seems to be going on forever and ever and ever. And I'm kind of elated, of course, that I'm going to be able to make it through the green light. And as I'm going, and it just seemed at that moment that time was stretching out in some really strange way. And I didn't recognize it at first, except I recognized that time wasn't acting the way that I expected it to. And then as I got halfway through the turn, of course, I got hit by a car and rammed into my the driver's side. The woman was going about 40 miles an hour. She ran a red light and ran right into me. And if I hadn't had the type of car that I was driving, I would have been killed, because it was a Toyota, has a special steel girder in the driver's door, which protected me. But it was that experience of time somehow expanding and stretching to the point which was I had never experienced before. And it's that type of thing that I'm looking for, I think, is how can I, what exactly happened to you? What did you see? What did you feel? Did you taste anything? Or is that too personal?
I mean, for me, it was more kind of a type of ecstasy, I would say, or a bliss that I had never experienced. And those times I was alone, and it was just, I'm not sure if I did a methodology or a meditation or something, but it was like going through these different hierarchies through the layers. And yeah, it was pretty much like bliss is the way that I explain it. Timelessness as well. Like there is a
Did you feel your
timelessness.
body somehow separating from something like a
Yeah, and
soul?
I felt very, very, very expanded. Like there was no outline to my body. There was no barrier. And then it was almost as if, it had stretched or expanded so much. It was covering the whole of the horizon to the whole of the world, to the universe. And it was extraordinarily strange, but that was the experience. And I have had random ones as well where they would just be like almost as if a waking up from reality to the real, like just out of nowhere. And it would be like a presence. And that would be random. And I have no idea why that would happen. Almost as if thoughts just stopped, time stopped, everything stopped, and that just happened. So I think that there is a relation to time. Like,
You mean like an other presence? Sorry. You
yes,
said there was
yes,
a presence.
like
And
an other presence, but it was an extremely loving presence that
mhm.
just appears out of nowhere.
Right.
And sometimes in conversation, sometimes when I'm on my phone, sometimes I'm just sitting down, sometimes I'm having conversations. So it's really, really weird. And I'm just thinking, what is it? What's going on there? And I don't know. But I do think there is this relation to time, or almost as if there's a gap,
Hmm.
and that happens. So I don't really know.
Sorry, King, I don't know if you want to jump in here. I feel like I've been monopolizing. But yeah, no, so honestly, similar for me, but different. The time aspect, and I'm just going to use the lemon tree example, because we've already brought it up today, but this particular example for me, so I was doing fairly consistent practice for, 10 days, 2 weeks sort of thing to try and, get in contact, try and ascend, as it were. It just wasn't really working for me. I just wasn't feeling it in the way that I wanted it to. Then, did my thing with the lemon tree, really kind of felt it. And right after that, I went on a walk, out in the city. I'm in downtown Toronto, so obviously there was a ton of people around me. And it felt like maybe not time stopped necessarily, but I was alone in that moment, in which lasted, who really knows how long it lasted. But yeah, I was looking at the horizon. I was seeing the sun come over. It was the, mid-afternoon. I was seeing the sun kind of come over the buildings, or under the buildings, I suppose. It was right at the precipice. And in seeing that, I actually saw what I perceived to be the Agathadaimon wrapping itself around this building. And I just, stopped dead, kind of took in what was happening in front of me. And there was, at that moment for me, there was no one else around. There was nothing else happening. There wasn't leaves falling. There wasn't wind on my face. It was just me and this entity that I was perceiving. And Farzana, you mentioned this expansive entity where it's almost this, just the size itself kind of brings you to your knees, because it's just so beyond us, so beyond me. And then kind of that it kind of started moving towards me in the snake-like way that I think it did, and that disillusion and falling into me and falling into my heart, and then feeling that radiance come from me, that understanding that massive scale that I saw, that I perceived, was in fact within me. And again, on this, I don't really know how to describe it other than a high, on this high of ecstasy, but also awe, and honestly fear too, because it was so very intense. I just basically turned around and walked right home. And there was, again, that whole walk home until I got in the door, was able to sit down and just kind of take a breath and think to myself, I was the only person. So yeah, I think that aspect of time is definitely part of it for me, that time dilation, as it were, or a breaking away from the regular rhythm of things, I guess, is the best way to put it. I almost felt in that moment as if I was outside normal reality. I could not even tell you what I looked like on the street. I probably looked like a crazy person, you know what I mean? But it wasn't even a consideration in my mind at that point. It was just the experience was too much for anything else to have any bearing on that moment.
Yeah, I mean, this time thing, there's definitely something that happens, either a distortion or a a kind of fragmentation of it or a timelessness. But yeah, something definitely happens with time.
Yeah, I think with this Agathos diamond thing too, it's related because at least there's the idea that you kind of mentioned briefly that like it seems like it's this diamond, but it also seems like it's within you. And I think just we've already mentioned Spare, so we might as well just throw some more modern people in the mix. Crowley takes this Agathos diamond idea and turns it into the Holy Guardian Angel, as he calls it, and puts it kind of at the center of his system. And like it's notoriously hard to describe because it straddles all these categories that we're talking about. It's kind of a diamond, it's kind of you, it's kind of existing in time, and it's kind of existing outside of time. So I think this is where this actually plugs back into Iamblichus. When Iamblichus talks about all of these reasons why we can't talk about high, like spirits that are sufficiently high using, sufficiently high up in the hierarchy, we can't talk about them using our normal reasoning and our normal way of thinking about things because they don't follow the same rules of like time and space. Like this is kind of where the rubber meets the road here. It like I know what you are getting at, and this is maybe going to sound kind of radical, but I feel like why does time get weird when you go deep enough into this kind of thing? And it seems to me like the reason time gets weird is because time is not something that exists by itself, but it's a product of a changeable world. You have to have things that are able to move and change, and when things are able to move and change, they're partial and imperfect. And the divine reality, the higher reality, is not this partial and imperfect thing, and so it doesn't change, and so it's not subject to time. And so when you have this part of your being which can reach up and like touch that, like just a little part of you that's plugged into that, even if most of you isn't, that part of you is therefore not subject to time in the same way, or at least there's like if you think of the like Sistine Chapel, like God reaching out to touch Adam's finger, like the very little tip of Adam's finger is not subject to time, even if the rest of them is. And so there's this juncture where like that which is timeless, that which does not change, is like giving birth to this temporal world. And when you get close to that like event horizon, time gets all screwed up, time, space, and all of it, because it's all just a product of imperfection. And so the closer you get to like the perfect, or like the good, the true, and the beautiful, the less that stuff starts to apply and everything gets all wobbly. At least that's my hypothesis.
Yeah, no, that's quite a good explanation because it makes sense. Like it helped me to understand it better because I always kind of wondered what goes on with time,
Yeah.
How does it make any sense? What is time like in the psychic realm, for example? Like, how are they experiencing time? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I like the Iamblichus idea of like multiples. Well, and it squares with what I have found or thought myself. I like the idea that it's not just a binary, right? It's not just like, well, some things are timeless and some things are inside of time. I like his idea that like you have levels to it, where like you have sort of the one which is completely out, like time does not apply, but then you kind of have some diamonds that are sort of kind of in time and sort of kind of not, and then you have some like heroes and sort of ascended souls who are more in time than the diamonds but less than you are, and then there's you, and you exist in, you know what I mean, time and space, and that's all. That's, you stop there. But I like this idea that like, of course, it's going to be mind blowing to interact with something that's outside of time, outside of space, outside of conventional reality. That's just not how we're used to dealing with things. And it's like a kind of kind to the practitioner to give them intermediate steps that they can take. That's like, well, you don't have to just jump to the sphere complete, mind blowing openness of cosmic reality. You can kind of take little steps there and get like just a little more cosmic as you go.
Yeah. Sounds good.
I still feel. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I
I was
still
just gonna say,
feel
like,
that I'm sorry. I still feel like. I mean, really not willing to accept, I guess, yet, Iamblichus's ontology or his explanation for these things. I'm still left, I think, with the man or the person who wrote the article about ESP, still wondering what the heck is this stuff? And I don't have, and I mean, believe me, I've read a lot of explanations for these things, but I'm not sure that I accept them for being the explanation for what I experienced. I mean, I'm willing. I guess I'm willing to accept the notion and accept the fact that they're unexplainable. I can live with that. I can live with the fact that, okay, well, there are things that are going to be unexplained, and I'm going to continue to search for those, and I'm going to continue to, in some way, elicit and invoke them, even though I don't have an explanatory framework yet within which I can somehow comprehend them in some other way than the fact that I'm experiencing them. I'm willing to exist, I guess, in this sense, that in this experiential matrix, and wait for the explanation, I guess, to come to me. Sorry, Ryan, I cut you off.
oh, that's okay. I would say, I mean, and again, I guess take this or leave this. Maybe this is just differences in practice and in understanding of what these things are, but for me, it's always been like I've kind of, I've read all these texts. I mean, I'm not that old, but like I feel like I've been doing this sort of stuff for a very long time, and at least in the context of my own life. But like at a certain point, there was this point when it was like, okay, I was there when I first started. I was like very interested in putting a label on myself, right? Like I am a Neoplatonist. I am a folk magician. I'm a XYZ, whatever you want to say, And then as I've read more, as I've had more, really not had more experiences, is what it comes down to. Like I've just come to accept that, at least for myself, at this point, anyways, there's no understanding that's going to be presented to me, at least not without practice. I think that the practice and the driving towards the above is how we come to those conclusions. Like I'm much more with Iamblichus than Plotinus and Porphyry on like, I don't think you can just rationalize these things. I think you need to live them and experience them. And that's where the understanding comes from. So like I don't know. It's so difficult to articulate. And King, I'm like actually really glad that that last little spiel you gave, because like in all honesty, I've never talked about that experience with anyone before. And being able to put it into different intellectual frameworks is really important. That's why I'm like so glad that this course exists. But though I'm able to put it into different frameworks, and though I'm able to think about it from different levels, I still don't understand the like fundamental nature of what happened to me. And for me, at least, that's part of it. You know what I mean? That gives me the drive to keep going and being like, no, this is something that needs to be worked on. I don't think that there's this like point of enlightenment that comes where it's just, I understand, or maybe there is, but I think that comes upon, ascension with the one, which probably takes several lifetimes, like I would suggest, at least, and take this as you will, Like the practice is the methodology, which is the ontology, which, you know, it's another example of cosmic sympathy. I don't know. That's just how I think about these things.
Completely agreed. I think anyone who practices these things in a comprehensive enough way will eventually come to that conclusion, and I think that's why we pretty much are all seeming to agree on this point that, like, ultimately you can't explain it, and ultimately that's not really the point. Like, why is there the attraction to the unexplained? Maybe originally, or maybe initially, some people are attracted to that because they want to explain it. But I think underneath that, really what people want is to experience it. And I think that's really why we're here. It seems, having talked to you all, and and this is maybe a little bit of a flip, kind of cheeky way to put it, but it seems like the real esoteric knowledge in some sense is not like intellectually understanding what you read in these books, but it's a flip in the way you read them, to reading them less as an explanation of what you're supposed to think and more as an explanation of a map for how to practice a system of some kind, or how to apply a way of thinking to your experiential life that you can go through. And
well, did everyone come at this like they wanted to experience something, or did they come at it just happened? I mean, if I were to go back, let's say, to the time when I started to really take seriously the Upanishads or Zen Buddhism, was I doing that because I was thirsting for knowledge, or was I doing that because previously in my life, in my childhood, I had experienced something that I wanted to learn more about and I wanted to experience again?
Yeah, but exactly. It's that I think it happens. I think a lot of times people are pushed into it initially, but then it's like after that, that's when you develop the bug, right? And what do you develop the bug for? Not necessarily to come up with a storyline to explain the first thing, although maybe at first that's what you want. But I think once you get pushed into it, you want to deepen the experience.
Well, I wanted to experience expansion of consciousness, or whatever used to be called expansion of consciousness, right? That's why drugs, that was the promise of drugs, was that you were going to be able to talk to God, basically. And I believed that, and I actually believe I got close and then fell back. But that was the impetus. But why would I have even wanted to do that? Because it's so crazy and out of the ordinary to want to do that. What would be the reason to do that?
Well, you applied. Did you have an experience unexpectedly at one point that had happened to you the first time?
I'm speaking in general.
Oh, okay.
Like what is the experience for everyone? What is the experience?
A bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, I can give my own. Yeah, go ahead first, Rana. Sorry.
No, just saying, like, a bit of both. And for me, it was more like a divine calling, like a year at which it was almost as if it's time. And then I had to pay attention to that. Like, I didn't really know what was going on. I was actually having experiences and I had no clue what was going on. And then as time went on, I had to try to understand all of this, like what on earth is going on. And then as I went through the journey and started reading and looking and searching and trying to understand, it was more of a calling back. I don't know if that's the right word. And that led one thing to another, which then led to me yearning for the divine. I think that's the path that is common, like it's a common kind of theme from things I've read anyway, but that was for me.
You had the experience before you even began to understand it.
Things that other people just didn't seem to be experiencing, and I'm like, are you guys seeing this? Are you guys feeling this? Are you guys experiencing this? And it's like, no, and it's like, oh my god, what the hell's going on then? And
Mhm.
that led me to kind of look and search and read and try to understand, and now it's about this. It's about expansion in consciousness and being one with the divine. Like, it's led to that ultimately. Yeah.
I would say for me, it was almost the opposite. It was that yearning for knowledge. I believe I've been over this with you guys, but just to reiterate, like, you know, when I was in my younger days, you know, high school, early undergrad sort of thing, I was like a very strong and vociferous atheist. Like, I was very into like your Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, that whole new atheist movement. And there was this time when I was just like, this is not good enough for me. This is not having the explanatory power of what I see and feel in reality. So started moving into, you know, Solomonic magic, these sorts of, I would say, fairly popular, not well understood, but at least, you know, regularly practiced, maybe, forms of, you know, esoteric thought that then gave me very real results. And it was like, okay, after I had those first couple experiences, that was it. You know, I was hooked. Yeah, exactly. It was like, okay, this is at least in some form real. And I feel like I cannot live without diving deeper into these experiences, without exploring what I've deemed to be like a new reality further, you know? So yeah, and like that, and and again, like I say, I started off in this whole thing like not looking for ascension necessarily, like just looking for activity, which actually got me into some fairly dark stuff, you know, sometimes in my past, which actually, man, it's a lot easier to contact the dark than it is the light, in my opinion.
Definitely. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so it's been
to us. Do you think that's the reason? Because they're quite close. Like, they're not. It doesn't take too far to go to kind of get in touch with them.
Well, I mean, I really am starting, and this is coming straight out of this group and like conversations that we've had, like something that I've come to understand, or at least perceive, is that we in fact are above the dark, the below, you know?
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I would agree with that.
I do agree with that, but I'm saying that in terms of the maybe distance is the way that I can describe it. It's not too far. Like, the veil between the lower realms is actually not too far. But to ascend a few levels up is a bit more further away. So I mean, that's how it's always kind of felt to me. Like, it's like next door neighbor is the underworld, but then you got to go to the sky to kind of get a little bit of ascension. That's how it's felt to me.
Totally. I'm gonna maybe not quite disagree. I'm gonna agree in a way that's maybe a little spicy, which is that I think that it's not that I don't think that either side is farther away necessarily or like harder by itself. I think that we actually are so used to applying our minds negatively and being cynical and stressed and unhappy that we find it harder to accept the presence of more positive forms of consciousness, even though they're equally close by. We're equally capable of them, but I think that we're conditioned not to accept them.
Yeah,
and
that
can make it harder.
That does ring true. But then the question is why? Because it's like the amount of effort that this group anyway, like, that we put towards that what we really desire, it should be just as easy then, because if it is really easy to do the opposite, and I can understand, being in a negative mindset and those kind of energies kind of radiating out of us is pretty much what the human race is under at the moment. A lot of depression, sadness, whatever. But the thing is, if you're making a conscious effort, why is it still so hard? Because you don't have to make much of an effort for the other stuff, right? But it really does seem like a struggle, like to get the
Yeah, because I think you're overcoming a lot of momentum there. It's not just that you wake up and decide to be that way. You're conditioned that way for a long time, and so you have a lot of habits to undo. That's what I think anyway.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah.
Well, now
I get it.
Iamblichus would say, and the other theurgists perhaps would say it's because of materiality, right? The body. It's because we live in this body, and the body has its anxieties, its negativities, its desires, which often go against what our mind thinks is the best for it. Would you agree with that, perhaps?
Yeah, it sounds like a similar thing. Yeah. I mean, it's just sounds the same as what he was saying, but just in other words. But yeah, I mean, I do agree with that. But then, I mean, are the daemons and the heroes not on a higher realm, like on a higher vibrational realm? I
Yeah.
always feel like they are further away. I mean, I think there is a distance thing.
Sure, but if they are, it's on a level away from the body, right? I mean, they can't
Yeah.
be. We have to accept his notion of this dichotomy, or at least that there's this stuff, thing, entity
Yeah, so this
called
is
a
where
soul that we have, and
this
these
is where
other entities are there.
Yeah, this is where the idea of this hierarchy of the density kind of comes in my experience anyway. And it seems like the lower realm, whatever they are of this lower density. Like they're extremely dense. There's a heaviness to them.
Mhm.
So maybe being in the body, the byproduct is being closer to them because
It's
I'm
a
not
dense
living.
body.
Yeah, so I'm not living in my soul. Like I'm not living from a soul level to be in contact with them so easily. So that's why I talk about distance, because it seems like that to me.
Maybe, but I think that you have perfect. I mean, not perfect. I shouldn't say the word perfect, but I think it's possible to tune your attention one way or the other. Like you have a mental experience every moment of the day, just as much as you have a bodily experience and emotional experience. There are various layers going on all at once, and you can turn one way or the other just as easily. Except for force of habit.
I also think there's, sorry to interrupt, but I also think that like the power seeking nature of how we all tend to live our day-to-day lives lends itself to that. I think that like to seek power, influence, all of these things, very common human experience. I think we all do it to a certain degree, even if we don't like to admit that is the case. And yeah, I mean, I think that this does fall into the force of habit thing, but that lends itself to the below, the control over materiality, Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
Go ahead, King.
No problem. That's a good point.
Agree. Yeah, I do agree.
And I personally don't, I try to leave this out of this discussion because I don't want to just throw a wrench in the works. But I personally, I sort of I get what they mean when the Platonists say that the sort of point of descent is the body. But I don't know if I would really agree that materiality is the right word for it. To me, it seems it's more. To me, it seems like you can think about that spectrum a different way, because rather than saying more material is more descended and less material is more ascended, at least as far as I've found, it's more like more particularized. is more descended, and more universal is more ascended. But there are things that you can say are universally the nature of matter too. So I don't think that splitting matter and non-matter, personally, that's not the way I like to think of it. And so being able to flip it the other way and just say particularity versus universality, it makes me, it puts what Ryan just said into some more perspective for me, I think, because a lot of times what you're doing when you're trying to be a person having power over another person is like, you're a particular person with your individual personal goals, and you want to exert those individual personal particular goals over somebody else's individual personal particular goals, and you're just going to do whatever it takes to do that. You could do that without a body. You could be a mind. You know what I mean? People who are intellectuals, people who are like litigators and debaters and can't stop arguing, and I'm kind of one of those people. Like, you can do that without a body. You can have that just as much of a power play, completely on an intellectual, abstract plane. But it doesn't matter, because you're still doing the thing where you're taking a particular position, and you're like, this is my position, and I'm gonna win. And I don't think that's any more virtuous just because it's not a body thing. And so yeah. It was an eventual point that I was getting to that I forgot, but yeah.
No, I actually love that. That's a great way to think about it. I will definitely take that one away with me and parse it a little bit. Yeah, because I mean, like, this whole, again, I have like this is my biggest gripe, and this is why I like Iamblichus, right? Of the Neoplatonists, my biggest gripe is that, like, antimatter, I guess, stance that they all seem to take, and it's like, why? It's like, we all exist in this framework, so why is that? You know, and that's why I've like never really been able to go like in the Gnostic direction. It's just that this idea of materiality as the embodiment of evil, it doesn't well, like, intuitively make sense to me, which, and again, as I've said many times, that like intuition's hugely important to how I think about these things.
Of course.
Yeah, that's kind of like where taking it to the extreme come in. Like, well, you know, then too much food is not good for you. Too much indulgence is not good. You know, that will just keep you, you know, in that lower level. But then being in a body, you kind of need food. You need to live. You need to make money. You need to do all of those things. So it almost feels like it's always trying to negate being in a body and in existence. And that, I think, that causes a major split in the mind, because I know that's one thing religion does. That so much emphasis on materiality makes it as if, you know, you shouldn't be in a body in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And like, if we're looking at spirit summoning traditions, which we are because the Iamblichus is too, so this is actually completely on topic. You know, for people who do goetic things and summon demons and whatever, like, the demons aren't material. So what, you think they're above you? Are you saying that the demon is better than you because it doesn't have a body? I don't really think so. It's that a demon has a concentrated form of power. That's a very particular and concentrated form of power, as opposed to something like an angel, which could be considered to have a more universal form of power. And
well, that's the
materiality thing is,
it's the Platonic, but it's the Platonic definition of matter that we would need to get in. There's a pure form of matter which is a totally different than the way we think of matter. It's it's really not material. The Platonic form of matter is the antithesis of being, right? You have being, which is pure spiritual, soul, and then you have matter, which is just pure matter, nothing related in any way to the spirit or the soul. And it is eternal. It continues to exist forever, but it is not good because it doesn't have any qualities. It has nothing of its own. It only lends itself to being formed rather than forming, and those types of things. So we grew up, of course, thinking of matter in a completely different way.
Right, that would
We
make
think
sense.
of it in terms of electrons, neutrons, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, because that would make a lot of sense, because like some people that I've come across that are enlightened, what it seems like to me is that their whole configuration is very, very different to someone that's not enlightened. This is like what I perceive. There's something about their configuration that through whatever it is that they've done, whether it's work, whether it's inner work, whether it's, carrying on this path, or whether it's the rituals or figuring it all out, I don't know what it is that they've done, but there definitely seems to be a different type of wiring to their being, and it's evident.
Well, here's something interesting about that. I think is that it's something that connects the kind of Buddhist tradition that I'm in with the Neoplatonists, that they both kind of mention things like this. And it's actually something that, I'm sorry, I've seen your username so many times and I've talked to you for so many hours, but I still don't know how to say it. Alcafribus mentions.
Sorry, my name?
No.
No, Alcafribus, me. I think it's Chaz. Just call me Chaz.
All right, Chaz. Oh, okay. Well, then, hello, everybody. My real name is Matt. I feel like I can't be the only one using my handle. So,
that's fine.
Something that Chaz mentioned back in the beginning as being an interest, which is this idea of bodies of light. So, like bodies, not like planetary bodies, like human bodies of light. In the sort of Buddhist lineage that I participate in most, there is this idea of kind of enlightenment that leads to what they call a rainbow body in Tibet, which is so normally we perceive our body as though it's composed of matter, that loaded term that we've been talking about. And it is kind of matter in the more Platonic sense. It's like matter in the sense of like we perceive it as being this sort of solid, dense, heavy, kind of like clay lump of earth, just like stuff that's kind of dead by itself, but you're alive, so your mind and life kind of enlivens this like a lump. And that's considered to be what it looks like from the unenlightened perspective. But as you sort of achieve these layers of enlightenment, and you get to a certain point, the perception of the body begins to shift. And from the outside, people who see it, to them, it looks as though this material body transforms into a light body, into a sort of iridescent rainbow shiny light. It looks as though it's like there was a body, but then it transforms. But from the inside, it's described as not being like that. It's not like you actually have a material, dense, sort of unbeing, sort of a dead body, and it turns into another kind of thing. From the inside, it's described as that being what the experience of the body has been all along. And the enlightenment process is a process of realizing this luminous dimension of the experience of the body already, as it already is. And so if it turns into rainbow light, it's not surprising from the inside, because that's what the person experiences the sensation of their body as being anyway. And this connects, I think, to very, very similar ideas in Neoplatonist cosmologies and sort of, maybe not in the formal philosophy as much, but in a lot of like legends and stories of people who, as they kind of ascend through the spheres and become closer and closer to the level of the one, they ascend away from the matter, the materiality of the body, but the same body is transformed into this light body that is, maybe it can fly around, maybe it has magical powers, but the main point is that it's a purer form of a body than the material one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it. And I think what Jazz was saying about the understanding of what it means by materiality, and what you were just saying, is what the books are saying. but because they were taught to me in a way of being in a physical body, oh, that's not a good thing, you shouldn't do this, can't do, you basically shouldn't live. It's really, they just didn't understand it. But yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And they do have this light body. It's extraordinary. And for me, it's like sometimes the people that I've seen, they almost look like they're a hologram. It's really, really strange. But then, if you touch them, they're very solid, very real. But it's like they're a hologram. It's really, really strange. But then they have a lot of radiance, and there's this power that emits from them. And some of them have this extremely peaceful presence that's just radiating across the room. So it's very, very tangible.
Tangible but immaterial. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And,
Well,
and just a question on that. Do you think these people are just lucky? Like, what is it? And is it just their turn for enlightenment here at this time? Is that all it is? Or do you think that it's possible for anybody that is on this path, if that's what they want, at some point in this lifetime, they will get it? Do you think it's...
I think if somebody has the bug, if somebody has the tendency and the motivation, that's the sign that it's possible for them. Because if they weren't, they wouldn't be into it. Like, they wouldn't have been. But the fact that they've already gotten to the point of being interested in it is that's already means they've already taken enough steps towards it that, like, it's possible for them. That's what I think. Maybe
I feel like any other skill, some people are born. I used to be a wrestler for a lot of years. There were some people that just were, like how, they were 12 years old, like competing with 16-year-olds. And it's like how that was just innate to them, they, I guess to a certain degree got lucky, you know what I mean? But like, I knew lots of dudes who did not have that, were not gifted natural athletes, but worked hard, put their soul into it, and were able to compete with those people. I think that it's like anything, same with like art or any skill, really. Some people are great at math, just naturally.
So do you think that's how it would work in the spiritual life? Like, do you think it's the same thing?
I mean, I do like largely see it that way. Yeah. I know that like you can maybe like parse that out a little bit more and talk about how, if you want to bring like past lives into it or anything like that, that would be like have more explanatory power. But I mean, at the end of the day, as we are living in these material bodies, that's pretty much exactly how I see it. It's a skill like anything else.
And where would this idea of like purifying the soul come into it? As in, like, would that mean that those people that are, on the road, or very interested or desire enlightenment, does that mean that they actually don't have much to purify? I think that was basically where I'm coming at it from. Like, do they just come here with less because now it's their time?
I think those are the people who have those are the equivalent of the naturally talented wrestlers. But
I mean, like for me, I'm definitely interested in these things on a very deep level, and I think I have a shitload to purify. So,
yeah, same.
I mean, I think that's what every human being would say, like without a doubt. Like, one person doesn't seem to have it easier than the other. But when you were talking about the light body and the rainbow body, surely that would take a lot of work to achieve. So would that mean that this person didn't come in with a lot in the first place?
It depends. It depends. So in Buddhism, they do bring in past lives as a way to explain this. So they say, well, the people who come in with less, it's probably because they've already been practicing for so many past lives that they've already started the path, previously, so that even by the time they were born, they already have a leg up. But they
Mhm.
also this particular path also describes, like, and this is a little bit of advertising maybe, and we can see this in Iamblichus too. I guess everybody who runs a mystical lineage has to advertise a little bit. They basically say our methods are so powerful that even if you're not one of the talented ones, even if you don't come in with a lot of experience, even if you don't come in with a head start, we can get you there in a single life
Mhm.
because of our powerful methods. Now,
Right. So
they
there
have
is
to
hope.
caveat those things with, oh well, you have to practice consistently, and you can't forget, and you have to do this and that, and you have to be
Right.
very devoted, and blah blah blah. But I think that basically both things are at play, that you can come in with less to start, but even if you don't, that doesn't, I don't think, bar you from going all the way.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think life happens, and I think that let's assume that someone were to have been transmigrated from a perfect life into this life, and they've been given the chance to go ahead and be able to live this life, having continuing to learn or recall. This is the Neoplatonic tradition of what they accomplished in the past life and the level of consciousness that they had attained then. Then they're thrown into this life, and life happens. I guess if you assume that if they've been really enlightened, even as a child, they would understand how to deal with the stuff that's thrown at them. But, life is nasty sometimes, and it does throw stuff at you that it would seem that maybe someone, even if they were enlightened, would not be prepared for and wouldn't be able to cope with. So, I do believe Iamblichus is correct when he talks about those who have reached this level of theurgic enlightenment and consciousness, that when they are reincarnated or transmigrated and they do come back to this life, they can continue to transmit that consciousness to others and live a life which is good. But I also believe that life can throw stuff at you that even an enlightened consciousness might not be able to handle directly.
Yeah, and I feel like that's why this sort of material contingent world is considered evil in the Platonic thing, because it's like life can throw anything at you, so good luck, if you live in a world where like things just kind of happen. Like,
if I'm an
sometimes that
enlightened
stuff is gonna be
person,
bad.
if I'm an enlightened child, let's say, and the bodhisattvas, or let's say the Dalai Lama, for example, lives in a pretty isolated, insulated life. Anyone born in a monastery is, right? But let's say I'm thrown into I'm an enlightened being. I'm thrown into the world, and when I'm 3 or 4 years old, an army invades the country, rapes my mother in front of me, rapes my 5-year-old daughter, or not daughter, but sister in front of me, and then shoots them, and then rapes my father, and then shoots him.
Yeah.
I think that that would be a particularly difficult situation for an enlightened person, no matter how enlightened they are, to deal with. So that's what I'm saying. I think that this world and its its chance occurrences really puts some type of twist on our ability to adapt, even given the levels of consciousness that we are able to attain.
Think about when Iamblichus was writing. It's like just after the crisis of the 3rd century. It's
right,
probably the darkest time in Roman history, right? There's a lot of war, a lot of badness,
he saw a lot of crap.
Yeah. It's like
but he was an aristocrat as well, right? So we have to consider that he was in some way cushioned from the realities of life, like we peons are. Aren't,
But like
rather.
he was probably able to see it happening without ever having to experience it happening.
Interesting.
Kind of similar again to Crowley. Not to bring it back to Crowley again for no reason, but I just
always
was
somehow
reminded
comes
of
back
that.
to
Where
I know,
Crowley,
how
doesn't
come
it?
Crowley? Where is Crowley?
you just come Crowleying back.
I know, right?
No, but just the aristocrat thing, he was, you know what I mean. He was
Sure.
he was an intelligence agent, perhaps some say, involved in various World War espionage events,
Right.
and but was also kind of a rich kid who was able to
Yeah,
travel
but he
the world.
treated people like crap,
And he treated people like garbage.
right? I mean, Neumeier, I think that's his name, his very close associate, was psychologically damaged from what I've read with his association with Crowley.
Yeah. Some people hypothesize some of his intelligence work may have involved torturing people. So it seems like he had a talent for that.
Yikes. Yeah, that I hadn't heard. No.
I feel like there's a lot of and maybe it's just because, it's esoteric, but it always seems like there's a connection with intelligence and this sort of stuff.
Totally.
Or maybe that's just because they know what's really going on, right?
There we go.
Well, he even actually says at one point, I think in one of his books, I just pulled this quote out for a completely different reason recently, which is why I remember it. But in one of his books, he's talking about the so-called secret chiefs, which are supposed to be like the spiritual beings, the ascended theurgic souls, transmitting magical knowledge to the Golden Dawn and the OTO and whatever the groups that he was part of. And he was explaining the idea to somebody, and he was like, "Oh, well, you could say that because we can't see them, that they must not be there. And you could say, well, if they're here and they're guiding the destinies of these orders and maybe the destinies of humanity, then why can't we tell?" And he said, you could basically say the same thing about Admiral so-and-so and General so-and-so in the Navy. But believe me, the moment they need to get a hold of you, you'll know. And I thought that was just a very ominous analogy coming from him.
Yeah, well.
You've been listening to the conversation of the Iamblichus reading group. We're covering the Egyptian mysteries with Iamblichus. So if you want, join us next time and we will continue the discussion. Thanks for listening.